There are some people who grow up trying to fit into the world, and there are others who grow up realizing early that the world might never fully fit into them. Yungblud belongs firmly to the second group. Dominic Harrison, whose stage name is Yungblud, was born in Doncaster, England. He entered a world built on structure, expectation, and quiet conformity. On the surface, it looked normal. School, home life, routines, and the usual path that most people were expected to follow. But internally, something about that structure never fully aligned with how he experienced life. From an early age, Dominic didn't process emotions lightly. Everything felt amplified. Joy, frustration, confusion, and excitement all came in stronger waves than what seemed normal around him. That difference made it harder for him to blend in socially, especially in environments that valued control over expression. At school, he wasn't necessarily rejected, but he often felt disconnected. Not because he lacked intelligence or ability, but because his emotional rhythm didn't match the environment around him. While others adapted to structure, he questioned it. While others followed patterns, he examined them. Inside his home, music already existed in some form. Instruments and creative exposure weren't foreign to him, but what separated him was not access. It was emotional urgency. Music wasn't something he casually enjoyed. It was something he deeply reacted to. He began connecting strongly with artists who expressed emotion without restraint. Not polished perfection, but raw honesty. That kind of expression made sense to him in a way everyday communication sometimes didn't. It showed him that emotion could exist loudly and still be meaningful. As he grew older, that internal connection turned into creation. He began writing music, not for structure, but for release. Early writing was not about commercial direction or industry expectations. It was personal expression, thoughts, identity confusion, emotional tension, and frustration all became material. This phase was important because it wasn't about success. It was about discovery. He wasn't trying to be an artist yet. He was trying to understand himself, but identity often forms quietly before it becomes visible. As teenage years progressed, that sense of being different didn't disappear. Instead, it became clearer. Rather than suppressing it, he began shaping it into something creative. That shift marked the beginning of transformation. Eventually, he created an artistic identity that separated him from expectation. Yungblud, the name represented more than branding, it represented release. A version of himself that didn't need approval to exist. It was chaotic by design, emotional by nature, and intentionally unfiltered. Under this identity, he began releasing music online. The response wasn't instant fame, but it wasn't silence either. Something about the emotional honesty began connecting with listeners who felt similar internal conflict. People didn't just hear the music, they recognized themselves in it. That recognition became the foundation of his early growth. Unlike traditional breakout stories built on polished marketing, his growth was emotional. It spread through connection rather than structure. Listeners didn't just enjoy the songs, they related to them deeply. As his audience slowly expanded, his identity as an artist began forming more clearly. His sound didn't fit into one category. It carried elements of punk, rock, and emotional storytelling. But it wasn't trying to be defined. It was trying to express. That resistance to categorization became part of his identity. Eventually, live performances became the turning point where everything changed. On stage, something shifted completely. The internal emotion that was difficult to express in daily life became fully visible in performance. Energy, movement, voice, and crowd interaction all merged into one experience. He didn't just perform songs. He released emotion into the room. Audiences responded immediately. Not just with applause, but with participation. The crowd became part of the expression. The energy flowed both ways. That connection built something stronger than early popularity. It built emotional loyalty. People didn't just attend his shows, they felt them. As momentum built, attention from the music industry increased. He was no longer just an emerging online artist. He was becoming a recognized voice in alternative music culture. But with recognition came expectation, and expectation changes everything. Because once people connect you with emotion, they expect consistency in that emotional intensity. That can become pressure for many artists. But instead of stepping away from his identity, he leaned deeper into it. He didn't reduce his expression, he expanded it. That decision defined his breakthrough phase. He wasn't trying to fit into industry structure. He was expanding the structure around him, and that is where his rise truly began. As Yungblud moved deeper into global recognition, his role in music began to shift from emerging artist to cultural presence. His identity was already established: emotional intensity, chaotic energy, and raw expression. But now, that identity was reaching far beyond initial audiences. Different countries, different cultures, different generations were connecting to the same emotional core. His live performances became central to his impact. They were not structured like traditional concerts. They were emotional experiences. Loud, unpredictable, and deeply interactive. The audience wasn't separate from the performance, they were part of it. That connection created something rare in modern music: emotional participation. Fans didn't just listen, they released energy alongside him. This is what built long-term loyalty. Because when people connect through emotion, the relationship becomes deeper than trend cycles. As his platform expanded, so did his cultural influence. His presence began representing more than music. It became associated with individuality, emotional openness, and resistance to social conformity. But success at that level introduces a new challenge. Not becoming known, but staying authentic while being known, because when your identity is built on emotion, the world begins to expect constant emotional output. That expectation can reshape artists, but in his case, it reinforced his direction instead of changing it. He continued evolving musically, but his emotional core remained unchanged. That consistency allowed his audience connection to stay strong even as his sound expanded. Over time, his influence moved beyond music alone. He became part of conversations around identity expression, especially for people who feel disconnected from traditional expectations. That symbolic role became part of his legacy, not because it was planned, but because it was lived. Even as the industry around him changes, his foundation remains stable: emotional honesty expressed without filtration. That is what separates short-term attention from lasting impact. At this stage, his legacy is still evolving, but already it is defined by one core idea. He created space for emotional expression without restriction, and in modern music culture, that is not temporary influence. That is long-term imprint. Because artists like Yungblud do not build their careers only through hit songs or public attention. They build them through emotional connection that continues long after performances end. And that kind of connection is much harder to replace. As his career continued growing, one thing became increasingly obvious: people were not drawn to him because he looked perfect. They were drawn to him because he looked real. That distinction matters. In an industry where image is often controlled carefully, Yungblud built his identity through emotional unpredictability and honesty. He allowed flaws, confusion, frustration, and intensity to remain visible instead of hiding them behind polished presentation. For many fans, especially younger audiences struggling with identity, pressure, or isolation, that openness felt important. It created a sense of recognition, a feeling that someone understood emotions they often could not explain themselves. And that emotional recognition is powerful, because music becomes more meaningful when listeners feel emotionally represented inside it. Over time, his audience relationship evolved beyond entertainment. Concerts became emotional spaces where people felt safe expressing themselves loudly. Fans connected not only with the music but with each other. That sense of community became one of the strongest parts of his impact. He wasn't just building a fan base, he was building belonging. That kind of influence cannot be measured only through charts or streaming numbers. It exists in memory, identity, and emotional experience. It exists in the people who discovered confidence through his music, the people who felt less isolated because someone else expressed emotions they were hiding. And that is where legacy becomes deeper than popularity. Because popularity fades quickly when it is built only on trend, but emotional impact lasts longer. As years continue passing, Yungblud's role inside modern alternative culture keeps expanding. He represents a generation that is less interested in perfection and more interested in honesty. Less interested in fitting into categories and more interested in expressing individuality openly. That cultural shift is part of why his story matters beyond music alone. He became proof that emotional vulnerability does not weaken artistic identity, it can strengthen it. And perhaps that is what makes his journey connect so strongly with audiences around the world. Because beneath the performances, the energy and the chaos is still the same person who once felt disconnected growing up in Doncaster. The same person trying to understand emotions that felt too large to contain quietly. The difference now is that millions of people understand those emotions alongside him. His story also reflects something larger about modern music itself. Audiences no longer connect only through polished perfection. They connect through honesty, personality, and emotional transparency. Yungblud entered music at a time when younger listeners were searching for artists who felt human instead of distant, and he gave them exactly that. Not perfection, not calmness, but honesty. At this stage, his career is still unfolding. New music will come. New performances will happen. New phases of identity and creativity will continue evolving. But even with all of that still ahead, his impact has already been established clearly. He became more than a singer, more than a performer, more than a temporary voice in alternative culture. He became a symbol of emotional freedom for people who spent years feeling pressured to suppress parts of themselves. And that kind of legacy does not disappear easily, because once people feel understood through art, they never completely forget the artist who gave them that feeling. This is Yungblud. This is his biography.